And good evening, everybody. My name is James Irwin. I'm the Director of Educational Programs for Sigma Alpha Epsilon. And I want to thank you all for working up a little bit of time, spending a little bit of your time this evening for this outstanding webinar on how to create change in your chapter. I see we've got many of you are eminent archons, and I'm glad you could take your time out to come out and join us. And for those of you who are just officers in the organization, you're just a member. I'm glad you're out here. This will provide an excellent roadmap for not just how to create change in a fraternity, but how to create change in general. Our presenter this evening is Prophet Delta Archon Chris Hallam, and I will turn it over to him in just a minute, just so you're aware of a couple of features here. On the right-hand side of the screen, we've got the Q&A portion where you can type in questions, and we will try to answer them while we are live and on the air, so to speak. And if we can't answer them then there's a question-answer period at the end. And also feel free to throw some chats out at the bottom, chat amongst yourselves, and have some general discussion. So without further ado, I hand this over to Chris. So Chris, take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you, James. And again, thank you everyone for giving up some of your time this evening, and hopefully you will find this beneficial and be able to take some information back to your chapters. As James mentioned, I am the Province Delta Archon. I also have served over the last 5 years as a chapter advisor for the Ohio State chapter. A little bit about my background and why this presentation. My undergraduate degree is in social psychology, and my master's degree is in psychosocial development of college students. I like to begin most presentations with a story. And one of the first instances where I truly saw a chapter struggling to change was the time when I was sitting in a room with the eminent archon, the deputy eminent archon, and the house manager, sitting around a cell phone, sitting on the floor on a conference call with members from our house corporation as well as from the national organization. And over the phone, they were just saying to us, we need you to fill the house. Now, mind you, we had room for 27 men, but we were barely filling every room as a single, and so 13 men, maybe 14 were living in the house. When we asked them, how did you expect us to accomplish this, all they said was, just do it. Just tell people to fill the house. That's all you have to do. Tell them no, they have to fill the house. And I'm sitting there looking at everybody's frustrated faces because that didn't answer their question of how to change the culture of only wanting singles in the house. And so I spoke into the phone and I said, give us 2 years. Give us 2 years to really look at why the house isn't being filled and what we can do to enact change. 2 years later, and ever since that time, the house has been filled. And a lot of the same qualities that we put into place are some of the same qualities that I'm going to talk about tonight. Over the years, 11 years that I've worked with over 10 student organizations, and I visited over 10 SAE chapters. So I've spoken with over 20 different student organizations. I listen to their stories about change, and inevitably I can point to the moment where either their idea was flawed, their implementation poor, or it was shot down and killed by others. 9 times out of 10, I see these members blame the failure on others instead of looking at what they could have done better to enact change in their fraternity. The men saw change as this obtuse concept that was more about luck and hope instead of actually following a process or a formula. Change is not an obtuse concept. It is formulaic. Let's take a look at what that formula is. Change is executing measurable ideas, less resistance, plus sustaining them. One more time, if you have to execute measurable ideas, you have to look at where the resistance may happen and what can you put in place to sustain that change to become part of your culture. To drive this point home tonight, that this is a formula, that there's a process to it, I wanted to think about what is the most formulaic thing that I know. And the most formulaic thing that I know and love is Hollywood movies. Throughout the next hour, I'm going to show you clips from 5 iconic, somewhat popular movies amongst college students that I think helps illustrate the point of how to create change in a fraternity and how it's a formula. In each of those movies, it's a sad sap of a person who changes who they are by overcoming adversity and eventually finds love. Let's take a look at our inspiration in 5 iconic scenes from these 5 movies.
step class?
It's making my head spin how many activities we can do.
Play Army Man?
Yeah.
This is how we do it.
Da, 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 da.
Hey, I never asked you.
Yeah.
You like guacamole? Ah! Run! Oh, God! Run! Run!
1, 2, 3.
Down, nipple fuck! Oh, Mika, you should burn in hell! Okay, all right, no, seriously, I think I'm done. Ooh, I think we're done. I think that's good. Ooh, you know what, guys? This is not a good look.
So I thought I wouldn't edit out the language, but I figured it was a little less true gentleman if I let the nudity stand, so I hope you don't mind me cutting out that piece of things. Now, as you saw with all of those movies, that they have those sad saps who, if you are familiar with any of those movies, they develop and grow and change to a wonderful person. So instead of calling this the Creating Change in a Fraternity presentation, I introduce to you the Hollywood model of creating change in a fraternity. Let's go over what some of the goals I have for this presentation for all of you. First, to demystify the concept of change in a fraternity and look at it no longer as this difficult thing to achieve, but rather that it is a process that you can work through. Establish a research-based process for creating change in a fraternity. A lot of what we're going to discuss tonight is not just based off of women observation, but is based on research. Provide action-based steps to minimize resistance to change. And finally, create a common language that perhaps you can take back to your chapters for Sigma Alpha Epsilon on how to enact change. So over the years, when I've met with various organizations and various fraternities, these are some of the examples that those members share of the type of aspects they wish they could change about their chapter, or something that they're struggling with one way or another. So maybe some of these are relevant to you. Maybe they stand out as exactly the type of items that you're hoping to enact change within your chapter. If not, I hope you'll take a look and think about one or two things that you wish you could change about your chapter and put it through the process as we go through this presentation and this model and see how it can be relevant to you. So let's think about each of those movies that we just talked about. In somewhere, like in Billy Madison, in some way or another, at the very beginning of the movie, it takes about a third of the movie where they establish that the protagonist is in some ways, for lack of a better word, a douche. As that protagonist usually meets somebody, or meets a friend, or a family member, or a new introduction to their life, that person begins to change, and they get to meet the real person of who they are. Inevitably, once things are going well in these movies, the protagonist makes a mistake and screws up. Finally, the protagonist figures out a way to fix it all, and then all is well, and the items are able to be sustained. That is no different than the model of change that I have for you. First, just as the movie takes a third of the time to establish who this character is and what needs to be changed, you need to go through the same type of effort, really blueprint and document what change and what it is that makes up the item that you would like to see change in your chapter. Then, really create a plan to introduce new aspects, new people, new conversations to implement that change. Inevitably, to avoid that screw-up moment, instead of letting it just happen, you need to identify what resistors are out there to the aspects you want to bring and enhance in your chapter. Finally, one time doesn't make change. One time makes an instance. Instead, you need to figure out what can you put in place to sustain that change that you want to see happen in your chapter. For each of these steps, we'll look at how those movies follow that type of process, and then we'll go over what you can do in your chapter to implement those steps of this model. So let's take a look at in each of these movies where they have develop the blueprint and establish that these characters of who they are and what their problems are.
Is better. I go on first and clean the hair. Conditioner is better. I leave the hair silky and smooth. Oh, really, fool? Really? Stop looking at me, Swan.
We are going to have tons and tons of opportunities to meet gorgeous ladies that are so aroused by the thought of marriage that they'll throw their inhibitions to the wind.
And who's going to be there to catch them?
Grab that net and catch that beautiful butterfly, pal. What do you like better, Christmas or wedding season?
Mr. Gray.
Yes. The answer would be wedding season.
Bingo. I'm going to go get my suit. Oh, now who are we this time? Hey, Lou Epstein, I want you to meet a real mensch, Chuck Schwartz.
Stop.
Let's go with him. Seriously, let's just do it.
Why?
Because, I mean, we never do anything. I mean, we're graduating. We should be going nuts right now. Let's just do something.
I am doing something. I'm going to class.
Quits, you already got into Yale. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore.
You borked?
Hold up. Yo, answer this question. Are you a virgin? Are you a virgin?
Yeah, not since I was 10.
It all makes sense. You're a virgin.
I am... Shut up.
How does that happen?
He's a fucking virgin.
Oh.
I knew it. That makes so much sense, man. Look, he's a virgin.
Wait,
You
dude.
guys are hilarious.
All right. Come on, don't be mean.
I'm not being mean. I'm trying to help the partner out. I'm trying to say I want to get you laid, dude. I understand what's going on
You guys
here,
are
right?
so up your asses.
From now on, yo, what's going on?
What I like about each of these clips is they still make the characters likable enough that there's enough positive qualities that you respect who they are, but you can still see that there's room for growth. This is no different with a fraternity. You may be doing some wonderful things, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for enhancement and where change can't be beneficial to your chapter. The first two steps of the model, developing a blueprint and implementing change, are oftentimes where I see chapters fail because they don't put in the work, or they don't actively choose because they recognize how much work it may be. So the first step in really trying to develop a blueprint is breaking down what are the contributing factors that you need to consider when it comes time for the aspect that you'd like to change. For example, with the story that I told at the very beginning in filling the house, it wasn't that the members didn't want to live in the house, but we had to really look at what were the contributing factors. And the first one was maybe the chapter needed to enhance their recruitment work so that there were enough members that there was a majority or there was plenty of people who we could even tap to see if they wanted to live in the house. Second, the chapter hadn't made the house a central hub for the rest of the members. They didn't make it enjoyable or a fun place to live. So instead of just focusing on why are you living in the house, why are you not living in the house, the chapter focused on let's do a better job of recruitment and let's make this be the fun place to be, to want to hang out and to hang out with your brothers. And it really was those contributing factors that we worked on, not the aspect of filling out the house. Once you've developed what those contributing factors may be, you need to think about and determine the level of passion that you and other members have to really put in the work into this. Is this something that is going to be your soapbox that you're going to stand on and willing to put in the time, perhaps even a year's worth of time, to make that change? You need to ask yourself, is this concept worthwhile? And is this something that is sustainable that I think will help us out in the long run? And when you're asking yourselves these questions, you really need to think about, can I get other people on board with my passion? Is this just something small that isn't a battle to face right now? or is this something that I know will be integral to the future success of the chapter? Once you've determined your level of passion, and perhaps others, start to drop hints and start to talk to some other people and see if they share some of the same ideas that you do. For example, let's say you do a lot of great things with recruitment, you do a lot of great things with new member education, but how you do ritual is not exactly what you're hoping for, that you think that's an area that you can improve, but you're not sure if other people see that the same way as you. Go around and start talking to members and say, hey, what do you think of how we do ritual? What do you think of the quality of our ritual equipment? How do you think people take this seriously? Do they pay attention to the words that are spoken? If people start to respond, you know what, that's a really good idea, or yeah, that's something I really have thought about as well, then you know that you have some people behind you who are going to start to support your efforts. How I always do this is I always talk to my new members over a lunch, and I talk about what is one thing that you would like to see improve in the chapter. And if all of them have a common theme or common topic that they've mentioned, now I know that I can casually drop hints to my exec board saying, I think some of our new members are feeling this way. Why don't we take a look at this? And if they go back to those new members and say, what do you think of this? I already know that I have the support and that that's going to get the executive board on the right path towards that piece of change. You need to do this, though, in a way that is very casual and non-threatening. I've seen some people be like, dude, don't you understand that we need to recruit more and everyone's being horrible except for me and except for one or two other brothers? And then people see that as a judgment rather than a enhancement of the work that needs to happen. So once you've dropped some hints, you've established your level of passion, you know what the contributing factors that you need to work on, then you finally need to ask yourself, and this is the point, is this the go-ahead or is it not? Am I going to be willing to put this forward and really attach my name to this as well as my other brothers and make this a rallying cry for our chapter? If you've established that, then what you really need to do is put in some legwork and start to create a baby steps plan filled with measurable tasks. And I really do mean sit down and write out what are the steps that you think you need to do 1, 2, and 3 to enact change. Because when sometimes people just put the final step, they don't realize the legwork that they're going to have to put in place to make this to happen. Or their goals are so lofty, which we'll talk about later, that they can't achieve it in just 1 month or 2 months. But really they need to put in 5 steps in place to be able to get to their final goal. Let's look at it from a chapter that wants to enhance their alumni involvement, or their alumni involvement only involves younger alumni who want to socialize at their house. So perhaps they're having struggles in that area. Perhaps step 1 is to eliminate and no longer allow alumni to socialize and break risk management rules at their house. Then step 2 is to put in place some newsletters targeted at older and the younger alumni. Then maybe make some personal phone calls. Step 4 can be really making some individual contacts with brothers and alumni saying, why is SA so important to you? What do you feel about lifelong bonds? Is there anything that we can reach out to you that you would want to know about us? Then finally bring back some social without alcohol. And then finally, if there can be allowed to have alcohol in your house or at an event, and then bring it back that way. And so then you have social functions that are proper risk management, as well as establishing contact. So that's 5 or 6 step plan that may take 2 to 5 years and not just something that can happen overnight. Once you have this baby steps plan, then it becomes to think about how are you going to implement the change that you want to see. Let's take a look at the videos where you start to see those hints of change in the members, in the characters in our movies.
You falling in love with the wall or something?
I had an accident.
You had an accident? What does that mean? Goo! Oh, I know. Okay. Don't worry, buddy. You hang tight. I'll be right back. You ain't cool unless you pee your pants.
Wow. Hey, man. Ernie pees pants, too. All right.
If peeing your pants is cool, consider me Miles Davis.
When you watch these movies, you'll be surprised how often this part of the movie is conveyed in musical montages.
Suddenly I'm up on top of the world. It should have been somebody else.
Pull out slowly and go straight ahead.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so free. Flying away on a wing and a prayer. Who could it be? Believe it or not, it's just me.
I'm all right.
It's high. You can stretch right up and touch the sky when the weather's fine. You got women on your mind. Have a drink, have a drive. Go out and see what you can find.
Lady.
Oh, you know, it's Pam.
I'm sorry. Well, Pan.
No, my name is Pam.
Are you saying Pan or Pam?
I'm saying Pam. Yeah, I'm sorry. Who's this gentleman sitting behind you?
Hello, Ms. Lady. I'm Dale. I'm Brennan's stepbrother, and I think I might be able to help with the Pan-Pam dilemma.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Pam.
Pam. Oh, no.
Pam.
Pand.
With an
There's
M.
a D on the end.
There's no D. It's Pam.
It's like calm.
Here, it's
Except
P.
P-A-N-M.
M.
N.
Two M's.
M.
That was the confusion.
No, there's just one M.
What do you say when we interview you?
All right, yes, that's a sometimes useful exercise. Please put your hand down. Go ahead.
How much money do you make a year before taxes?
Okay, I'm actually not comfortable answering that.
Come on!
We're doing the interview now, not you.
Cool, dude. I'm sure he'll like that.
Woo! Samuel!
Excuse me.
So, in all of those, you began to see the change in the characters from where they were initially established. And that's no different. This is the time to put on that demonstration of what you would like to see change in a chapter. The first step is to form a powerful coalition. I've heard this when I went to leadership school with Dave Stolman, and I researched and read about it when Cotter said the exact same thing. You need to figure out who you have on your side and gather people to officially know that they're going to have your back and support this idea of change. Another aspect is sometimes people will only get their coalition full of just their friends, but I like to really talk to people about get some bipartisan support, as they say in politics, from the other side of the aisle. Get someone else who, yeah, there are some cliques in chapters, that happens, but get some people from other cliques who may get other people behind them. And then if this is an issue that needs to be voted on in chapter, you know who your votes and who is going to support you in that chapter meeting. It blows my mind when people go into a chapter meeting and don't know that they already have the votes. That's how it works in politics, and it is no different in a fraternity. If you are just proposing an idea for change in a fraternity and you don't know you have the votes going into it, you didn't do enough work. The next step, particularly if this is going to be something that you're going to present for a vote or discussion in a chapter meeting, is determining who will communicate that message. Perhaps you're the idea person, but you're not the best public speaker. Perhaps you have a great idea, but you know that if you say it, there are certain people who may not agree with you no matter what. Or for me, I believe in self-governance of a fraternity, and me as an advisor should not be the one standing in front of a chapter telling them what they need to change. So really think about who is that person who will communicate that message, even if it is not you, because that may hinder the process instead of help the process succeed. And really think about how you are going to communicate that message. Establish all three of these aspects. And when I say communicate that message, I mean really go over and come up with a clear, detailed, well thought out explanation of why this needs to change. Most of the time when people see that you've put the effort in and it's very clear to them and they understand the goals and the reasoning, they'll be fine with it. I've heard chapters talk about how they can never raise the dues. And I asked them, did you show the budget before the new dues? And then after what the budget would look like after the dues? And they're like, no, we just said we think the dues should be raised. And I'm like, make it clear and well thought out so that people can't disagree with the data that you're presenting to them. The message, they need to be motivated, able to understand, and it relevant to them. Let's say you have a long chapter, or you had already had a presentation, maybe even such as this one in a chapter meeting. The members, and it's time for the vote, the members may not be motivated or want to hear it because they don't want to go through the discussion because they're already tired that it's been an hour or an hour and a half chapter meeting. So if they're not motivated at this moment, make sure that you do it at another time. Again, it goes back to the clear message thought out so that they're able to understand it, and make sure you explain to them why it is relevant to them, maybe because as a senior or as a new member, why it's relevant to them as a fraternity, or why it's relevant to their success. Believe it or not, appeal to their feelings. Yes, men do have feelings. Appeal to their level of disappointment of something that the chapter didn't achieve, or maybe their excitement and passion that they're currently going through at the minute. Maybe it's the appeal to the zeal that they have of what it means to be a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon, or even appeal to the ritual and their feelings towards that. Figure out what the feelings the chapter may have towards this topic or toward their chapter, and direct the change toward that. Tailor the message to the majority's values. I'm not naive. I know that some chapters, the social aspect is a primary function of what they do, rather than just the dessert. So let's say the social aspect is important. And let's say one of the things that you want to change is the quality of new member education. Perhaps you talk about that if we enhance our new member education and we focus on no hazing and we focus on what it means to be a true gentleman with brothers and with other people, and then we focus on the true gentleman aspect of respecting women and respecting others. Perhaps we'll have better behavior at parties, more people want to attend, also because they're following all of our risk management aspects, and our social life can only increase, and our relationships with other chapters and other sororities can only be enhanced with a quality new member education process. If that's their value, you just appeal to something to enhance the value that they respect. Perhaps another way to communicate the message is creating a crisis. One of the times where I see chapters do the most change or positive change for the chapters is when they're going through a crisis. Now, I don't want you to actually have to face that, but sometimes if you can present an aspect in a crisis manner, in a calm manner, and clearly, chapters may be willing to get behind that message. For example, let's say you have a 30, 35-person chapter, and you present to them the crisis of, we're going to have 15 seniors graduating this year, and then 10 people graduating the next year. If we don't enhance our recruitment now, we're going to die off in 2 years, and then it's going to be even more difficult to enhance our numbers. So we're at a turning point right now. We're at a crisis. This is something we need to focus on and something that we need to change. So again, don't fabricate a crisis, but illustrate one for them. The first two steps are very step-by-step process. Understanding the change, breaking down into the baby steps, figuring out how to explain those and implement that change and that plan of action to the chapter. The next two are more a menu type option. Let's take a look at some of the conflict in each of these movies that these members came across, and then we'll talk about how to talk about the resistance that you may face toward change in your chapter.
The only reason he passed was that he offered me a bribe of $5,000, which I regrettably accepted. I'm sorry, Billy.
That was Principal Max Anderson of Polyfector Elementary School with a devastating news.
Dad, he's lying.
You made a fool out of me. This was a mistake from the beginning.
Ron, I've got some interim forecasts for you to... Hey, why is everybody so glum?
You seriously don't believe me, Dad?
That's right. I seriously don't believe you. The deal's off. Eric's got the company.
I'm coming in. Can I come in? Look, I've just been crazy lately. I mean, the whole scholarship thing, you know. I mean, it's killing me, you know. But I'm not even thinking about that. The only thing I care about is you, you know. All I want is just for us to go back to normal again.
It's a real nice place you got here, D.
Can we talk about this later?
But maybe you want to sit back on the swing.
Johnny! She's trying to kill me!
Whoa, whoa!
Get the gun from her!
Put the gun down! Mother, stop!
This is the real world, lady! You can't just go shooting people on a whim!
Why does Grandma have a gun?
What did you do? I told you that in confidence. That was a confession.
What are you talking about?
Why don't you tell her, John? I don't know what's going on. I'm playing catch up too.
Zach, what are you doing?
You remembering yet? You remember yet?
Are you okay?
They're not who they say they are, Claire. Those aren't even their real names. No, everything they told you's a lie.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Claire, they crash weddings. They crash weddings so they can sleep
You want me to open a store? You want me to sell everything? You know what? I'm gonna tell you something. I don't just change like that. I can't just change for you.
I'm not trying to change you. I like you. I'm trying to help you grow up, Andy.
Well, thanks a lot.
I mean, my God, you ride a bicycle to work in a stock room.
You know what? I'm not in the stock room anymore. I'm a floor manager.
Okay.
And I ride a bike because I like to. Einstein rode a bike.
He had a wife who he fucked, by the way. What do I have to do for you to have sex with me? Do you want me to dress up like Thor? I'll dress up like Thor. I'll dress up like Iron Man. What do they do? I'll do it.
What? Everything's always about sex.
Why do you want to have sex with me? Why not? Tell me. You tell me the truth. Is it because I have a kid who has a kid? Is that why?
No, it's cool that you're a grandmother. I love the fact that you're a grandmother.
Oh, God!
You are. You're a hot grandma.
Oh, my God. You are so...
It's your fault.
You know what your problem is? You live in a fantasy land. You refuse to get a job, and you don't even know what it's like to work for something.
You don't take responsibility for your actions, and that's why this is all your fault.
Well, you're a mama's boy who's too chicken to sing in public. Yeah, that's right. Run away, little boy. You know it's true. Just avoid everything. What are you doing?
I purposely chose the 40-year-old virgin clip because it's exactly what we talked about at the very beginning. It's too often people say you can't force change. They want to make change just happen. And that's exactly what they talked about, that you can't just say make it happen. You have to say, what do we put in place to make the change happen and develop these characters? But inevitably, in each of those scenarios, each of the characters ran into some resistance. So let's take a look at a menu of options of resistance that you may run into in a chapter. The first is the boomerang effect. The boomerang effect is whenever someone argues for an idea so strongly that it turns everybody else against the idea, even if it is a valuable idea. I used to have an EA who I said, 90% of the time he was correct, but only 10% of the time did he execute it well. He turned everybody off to it. Where I often see this happen is even in elections, where friends of a member they want to see elected argue so strongly on that person's behalf that they basically turn everybody else off to that person. So really thinking a calm, well-reasoned argument and a discussion that is stated plainly to a chapter can often have a better impact than a truly passionate, overwhelming commentary. The second level of resistance that I see most frequently is dealing with those who are previously in power. Oftentimes, people who are in a fraternity, people who are previously in power, see change as a statement on their work, that they could have done better, that they didn't do everything that they can do. I actually had this discussion with somebody the other day, and what I said is, why don't you pull that person aside? Why don't you say to them, hey, I really respected everything that you did, but here's an idea that I have that I'd like to see us enhance, that I'd like to see us grow, that I'd like to take what you did and move it in a new direction. Will you support me in this effort? So now, instead of that person previously in power shooting that idea and getting people behind them, now you have them as a person who is collaborative with you rather than an antagonistic. Another way, as we talked about, is by having that powerful coalition, you know that you already have the majority vote before the previously person in power has something to say. Another way is you wait to enact change until they faded away. Maybe they're not attending meetings, maybe they've graduated, and then you try to enact change. But really think about how the person previously in power can impact the level of change that you want to implement to your chapter. Oftentimes when I see people previously in power on board with the situation, because the people approached them and pulled them aside, it is almost a unanimous decision to enact that change because you have the up-and-coming leaders as well as the previous leaders. One aspect of resistance that I get is really people's self-doubt saying, but I just can't make them do it. I can't. One, if you had a good plan, you can figure out how to develop them to do it. But this is usually where I hear chapters talk about that 20% of the chapter does 100% of the work and 80% of the chapter does nothing. And to me, that is BS, because you can get other people on board with change if you give them measurable tasks, if you delegate tasks, if you hold them accountable for the expectations that you and your chapter have of them. So normally when people are saying, I can't make them do it, what I'm actually hearing is, you have a fear of being disliked. Oftentimes I say to people, now what is the right thing to do and what is the popular thing to do? And if you're doing the right thing, you may not always be the most popular person, but you're oftentimes the most respected. So really holding people accountable and having measurable execution of ideas, you can make people do it. And that's how you overcome that level of resistance. We discussed this a little bit earlier, but when chapters have too aggressive of a timeline, when they want to go from recruiting 8 members a year to 30 members a year, that may be too aggressive. That's again when they didn't have a step-by-step process of the level of changes that they wanted to see. And finally, sometimes after chapters are successful, they begin to fall into a rut of complacency. They begin to be a little bit fat and lazy because of how successful they were. So how to overcome this complacency is once you've achieved a goal, is immediately setting what the new goal is and what the new expectations for those members are. It goes back to a lot of the steps that we previously talked about. Quality communication, understanding the contributing factors, and then having that baby steps plan to be able to work through a lot of the resistance that you may see. To leave some time for questions or discussion at the end, I'm going to move on from the next video and just go on to sustaining change and how do you sustain change within a chapter. First and foremost, it's okay to be upfront with your chapter that you recognize that this is something new, that this is going to take some time getting used to. And if people have questions and people have discussion about it, to feel free to talk to you outside of meetings, individually one-on-one, to understand what their new role may be, why this is important, just to make sure that your message is getting out there. When you make it clear to people that this is change, oftentimes people are less resistant from when they intrinsically feel that it's a change, because that intrinsic fear of change can be what holds them back and holds them back from doing it over and over and over again. Oftentimes what I try to tell people to do when they're trying to sustain change is repeat that message over and over and over again. That maybe you're saying that recruitment is our number one goal, that attendance at events is our number one goal, and talk about that every single chapter. One chapter I asked, how do they enact change and get people to be more active? They talked about their biggest problem was the concept of people saying over and over and over again, it's not my job. I asked them for example of that, and they said, well, we were having a recruitment event, we were having a cookout, and when we got there, there was no more propane left. And the recruitment chair wanted to be there to make sure that they could welcome and introduce themselves to the new members who came to their chapter house. So they asked a person who was just sitting down in discussion saying, hey, can you go up the block and get us a new propane tank? And that person said, not my job. They were basically saying that it is not my job to benefit this entire chapter. So they went into a chapter meeting and said, not my job is no longer acceptable. You cannot say, not my job, over and over and over again. If someone said, not my job, they repeated, not my job is no longer an acceptable response. They said within 2 months, people had no other excuse. They knew they couldn't say it, and they had more action from their chapter, just by repeating a message over and over and over again and benefiting the narrative. As much as we don't like to do it, positive reinforcement and negative punishment that you are willing to enforce can have an impact on your chapter. It's pure cognitive psychology. I know a lot of students don't want to admit it, but college students do respond to positive reinforcement and negative punishment. Positive reinforcement is the additional stimulus to increase the frequency of a behavior. So let's say recruitment, again, is one of the aspects that you want to enhance and change. Let's say after the recruitment period, you pull all of the new members and say, who was the top 3 people who are influential in you coming to this chapter? When you tally who those top 3 members are across the board, perhaps you discount their dues or parlor fees because they invested so much time in recruitment. Not only are you highlighting success, but people see a reward, and you'd be surprised how often people then strive and do the work because of the extrinsic response. Whenever you want to do negative punishment, you do need to make sure that you're willing to enforce. And again, I've heard this even at leadership school and many other seminars for students. But if you're not willing to enforce the negative punishment, you basically then are tacitly condoning not engaging in that change. So be very careful before you add in negative punishment. But if you're willing to enforce it, start off small and you can build over time. Try integrating change into every position. Let's say you don't really have a lot for your recorder or your warden to do. And attendance at events is one of the main things that you want your chapter to focus on. Not every single chapter, not every single event, but periodically have maybe your warden read off those who attended events and those who didn't, so the chapter can recognize that people are paying attention to their attendance or not. Integrate it into other positions, because then you're also going to get those people in those positions and their friends to want to engage in the change as well. You need to be very careful not to play favorites. The moment that you start playing favorites when it comes to an act of change or positive reinforcement or negative punishment is the time when change is set up to fail, and it's not going to sustain because people just see it as a flash in the pan or something at that moment. An example of this, and it is my chapter that I work with, is they decided that setting up chapter meetings in formal attire, dress slacks, button-up shirt, tie, top button buttoned on that tie, would help focus and behavior in chapter meetings. One chapter meeting, after working long 8-hour days, I didn't have my top button unbuttoned. I didn't have my top button buttoned. And the eminent archon said to me, Chris Hallam, we're not going to continue a chapter until you button that top button. A lot of people were shocked. A lot of people oohed and awed, oh, that he called out the chapter advisor. But I watched, and everyone from that moment forward was buttoning up their top button and coming in chapter, because they knew if he was willing to call out the chapter advisor, rightfully so, then he was going to be willing to call out everybody else. And now 3 years later, there's still not a moment where someone is not in full dress attire at chapter. Finally, something you have to consider in sustaining change is that it is not a habit for at least 2 to 3 years. It takes a lot of time for something to become just what your chapter does. So even when you're trying to establish change in a chapter, you need to make sure that there are people focusing on how to sustain that change for at least 2 to 3 years, and then aspects of that chapter or the change will naturally happen. So let's review one last time. There's a blueprint for change. You figure out how you're going to communicate and implement that change. You identify your resistors, and then you figure out how you're going to sustain that. Just ask yourself at the very least these 4 factors. If you can't remember anything from this presentation, I hope it's these 4 things that you'll remember. What are the contributing factors? What is our baby step plan? How will we communicate the message? Can we prepare for the resistance? And what do we put in place to sustain? Successfully going through these 4 questions to anything that you would like to change in your chapter, I do believe that you have the utmost chance of success of enhancing the qualities that your chapter wants to see grow. So again, here are some of those aspects that I've seen in talking with chapters about how to aspects they want to change about their chapter, and perhaps this may engage you to want to ask some questions or go through one of these in a little bit more depth. But for the most part, that is the presentation. So I'm happy to take some time, answer some questions, and then I hand it over to James to wrap it up as well.
Thanks, Chris. One of the questions that came in, and please feel free to continue submitting now if you've got any questions, is there some sort of a handout or worksheet that's available in order to, so we can try to use this as a checklist?
Absolutely. There should be a handout made available to you by early next week that we can share with chapters and share on the new TGI.net. That will really kind of break down and just summarize the pages that have the steps in the menu options.
Excellent. Next question coming in. Do you have any specific recommendations for how we can deal with apathy within the chapter?
Sure. I think you need to really break down what may be contributing to that apathy. Is it that when members were younger members, they weren't engaged and not given delegated out tasks because you have so many executive members taking on a lot of the roles and responsibilities? So then when they become older members and they're not in positions, they don't know what their defined role is as a non-executive or non-chapter office member. So maybe that may be the contributing factor. I would look at, is a contributing factor communication? Are we communicating aspects well enough in advance that the chapters know where they can get involved and what's coming up? I often see chapter members think there's apathy when people don't attend events, but rather is it, have you clearly established what time is the event, give them 2 weeks in advance, understand how it relates to what other aspects they may going on in their class. So then I would start to look, if you've established those factors, work on those breakdown and the contributing factors, and then look at what type of resistance you're getting and go back and revisit your baby steps plan. But I've often seen it's communication, or it's people get in a habit early on that they don't see that young members get involved in the chapter, so they don't get involved.
Great answer. Thank you. Next question coming in. If brothers feel their voices are not heard, like the 20% concept, what can we implement to make their voices feel heard? In other words, the feeling that the exec runs the chapter by themselves.
Sure. Couple different things that you can think about. And again, part of the value of the presentation is this may sound cliche, is breaking down where are the times where the executive members feel heard, and can the other members who feel like their voices aren't being heard contribute in those discussions? So is there are your executive board meetings open to regular members? Can they bring grievances during those type of aspects? Maybe if your executive board is feeling that their voice is being heard, can you ask them, what is one project that you want to work on or an idea that you have, and pair them with an executive member so that you have that engagement and dialogue? Perhaps a contributing factor is you're not engaging in dialogue with those members from the executive board, and so you ask each executive board member to go out and reach out to 2 people who are not their closest brothers and say, what is something that you value that you feel the executive members aren't doing? Maybe a way, if you're worried about resistance or conflict, perhaps create a small survey of what aspects a stop, start, continue to all members of the chapter, and have the executive board review those honestly and see what they can start, stop, and continue. That would be a way to communicate the message. So really look at the breaking down those contributing factors. And if that's something that there's more specifics and you want to email me, as you see is up on the screen, I'd be happy to follow up with a phone conversation in more detail if that's something that I wasn't able to cover with that answer.
Good answer. What recommendations do you have for our chapter problem? Our chapter has a problem with juniors and seniors not being involved. What recommendations do you have for getting them involved?
One of the things that I've seen chapters do to get juniors and seniors involved is find that junior and senior who has that absolute zeal and start to and this goes back to sustaining a change as a habit, and it may take some time. So find that member who has that zeal and say, hey, we have this problem where people start piecing out towards the end of their run. Can you commit definitely to the 4 years commitment to this chapter? Can you make sure you still come to each chapter meeting? Can you start demonstrating to people what it means to have a senior participating in chapter? That you just need that moment or that catalyst to turn things around. And as people as sophomores start to see 1 or 2 juniors get involved, and then the next year 4 or 5 juniors and seniors stay involved, and maybe then it becomes 10. By 2 to 3 years down the road, and I know that may not be what you're hoping for, but then it just becomes natural habit that juniors and seniors are involved, and it really does start with 1. And I've seen this at two different chapters. But really look at what is the resistance that those juniors and seniors are not getting. Is it they feel that their dues aren't going to as much? Do they feel that they have other academic obligations? So maybe you just say to each junior and a senior and say, what is 1 or 2 things that you can contribute this week, and give me what you can give me, and then make sure you highlight that point with everybody else. So you're talking to them what their resistance that they may encounter may be, and then helping them overcome their own individual resistance, which then, again, sets a habit for the chapter.
Good job. I've got one question before I read it, though. Joe from Mido, I see that you've raised your hand. I don't know how to work with that from this side, but if you type your question in the chat or the Q&A, I can help you out and respond with whatever question you've got. Next question. Would you recommend setting up committees to get things done more efficiently? It seems our chapter relies heavily on the elected position rather than offering to help. So would creating these committees, say a Pledge Ed committee, be a good idea to increase involvement?
It can. I think committees can, you have to look at the personality of your chapter. Where committees can fail is when the tasks aren't measurable and they don't have a charge, or often they get stuck in conversation. So that conversation happens and nothing is ever produced. So I'd really set with them, what is their clear charge, what is their clear deadline when something needs to happen, and let them know that consensus just can't happen, that they need to produce something tangible for the chapter to work on. So I think committees really can be work, and it's, as we talked about earlier, it's engaging other members, younger members perhaps, in the chapter and combating apathy, but it also can just become death by committee. So I really think it can work, but you need to really look at what will be the contributing factors and what is the resistance that a committee may face.
All right, good job. That's the end of the typed questions. I'll make a couple of closing remarks. Well, actually, I'll hand it off to you, Chris, to make your closing remarks. Last chance for anybody typing a question while Chris is talking. Take it away.
Sure. I really do believe that, as we've talked about the changes of formula, I hope the movies and the process really set that home. I'm happy to discuss with anyone specific ideas, but if you really review those 4 questions that we were talking about earlier, that I really think you can break down what is it that you want to see change and how you want to implement it, and going through those 4 steps, and I do believe you're successful. I thank you for giving your time. I think it demonstrates your dedication and your zeal for SAE and taking and elevating your chapters to the next highest level. And I hope I can be an active member in giving this presentation to your future success. Thank you, and Phi Alpha.
Thank you, Chris. Gentlemen, in a few minutes, I'll be sending out an email with a survey so you can evaluate tonight's presentation. Additionally, be on the lookout. We will be sending out a survey to our leadership across the board for our chapters for what topics you may want to see for the spring term for our webinars. And additionally, this webinar has been recorded. It will be available at the tgi.net, and Chris is available for further questions if you need him. Just send him an email. And lastly, let me announce to you guys, November 14th will be our next webinar. It will be Recruitment 365. What exactly does that mean? Focusing on exactly what that concept is and how it goes about. So once again, gentlemen, thank you for your time this evening. I hope you found this useful, and Phi Alpha.